when we came here, there was a global recession in 2008. Didn't really know what to do. I mean, I thought clothing, and then there was a recession. Can't do that. I used to eat at the Ishta Hotel a lot. There was a Chinese restaurant called Bantao. He was a Chinese guy who was also, again, one of those Chinese guys that lived in India all his life. They look Chinese, but they speak fluent Hindi and all that. His name was Chef Anthony, and we have a big problem with these restaurants that we have is we just can't get ingredients. We want to make these different cuisines and these different flavors. The consistency of getting these ingredients was very difficult. He said, look, just get me all this stuff and I will buy from you. And there was one big store in the center of Pune. There was nothing else. I mean, how is it that the whole city depends on one store for all of these things? Which is why I decided to open Tutto Bene. First Tutto Bene opened in the south of Pune in an area called Vanodi in November 2008.
Hi, welcome to Rooted and Routed, the podcast about expat life. I'm your host, Api Mirpuri. Today I'm here with another special guest, the one that I know since a long time, but still not, I don't know him well. His name is Api Mirpuri. He's in the business of gourmet food, but his background is quite diverse. He's lived in multiple countries and have moved from clothing industry to food industry. Let's welcome and see what we can uncover from him. Hi, Api. Welcome.
Hi, Sevilla.
Hi. So, as I said, you've lived in multiple countries.
Yeah.
Let's hear it because I am not aware from which country did you. I thought you're Indian.
Yeah.
Always have lived in India.
Yeah.
Probably being abroad for work or for studying.
Yeah.
But not beyond that. Can we start? Where have you lived?
So basically, I feel lucky, fortunate, because my father was one of those people that was displaced from Pakistan. So my dad, we're Sindhis. Sindhis, originally, a lot of us came from Pakistan in Sindh, also, which was Hyderabad and Karachi. So a lot of us used to live there, but after the partition, we fled. We had to run away, and they treated us quite a lot of Hindus badly.
Yes.
So we were like the rest of the Hindus. We had to leave. So my father had an opportunity because of his uncles from his mom's side. They already had businesses in Hong Kong, and so he was recruited by one of his uncles and said, "Come and help us with our business in Hong Kong." Which is why he landed there to begin with. This was in the early 50s. So he worked there, then he got married to my mom. My mom's from Calcutta. And he brought her to Hong Kong. And so I was born in Hong Kong. Did all my kindergarten, junior high, and high school there. But I, at a very young age, I liked independence. So when I was all of 13, I told my dad that I wanted to experience boarding school life.
You said that?
Yeah. So I said I wanted to experience boarding school life. And my grandmom, from my mom's mother, was living in Bangalore at the time. And so he said, okay, so if you want boarding school, there's one right next to your nanny's house, which is my mom's mother, called Bishop Cotton's in Bangalore. And so I went there. I was there. I was 14 and 15 when I went to boarding school in Bangalore in Cotton's. And so that was the first time I lived alone. And when you're in boarding school, you have to do all of that yourself. Yeah. So, but I only lasted in Bangalore for 2 years. Because I think it was a culture shock for me coming from Hong Kong and then living in Bangalore, and that also in a boarding school where it was very different. So I lasted 2 years, and then after 2 years, I think I didn't do really well in school.
Okay.
Because it was very disturbing, the culture shock and all that. So after I finished my 10th, my mom said, do you want to come back home? I said, yeah, I think I'm ready to come back home. I don't think I want to live in a boarding school anymore. So she took me back to Hong Kong. And but 6 months into living at home, I already felt very claustrophobic. And so I said to my dad, I said, I want to leave again. And he says, well, now where do you want to go? And so I said, I want to go to the US. And he said, no, I'm not sending you to the US. You're too young to go to the US by yourself. But if you want, I'll send you in a year to Canada. Okay. So because he had a sister there who lived in Toronto. Yeah. And his sister was very strict. So he said, the only place I will send you, if at all, is to Toronto. And so I said, okay, but I had to do a year of a Canadian school in Hong Kong I did 2 years of Canadian school in Hong Kong to understand the Canadian system. And then they place you into a college in Toronto, or into high school and then college. So I did my 11th and 12th in this Canadian school.
How old were you?
16.
Okay.
And then at 16, I graduated from 12th, but I wanted to do my last year, which is grade 13. In Canada, they have a grade 13 as well.
Grade 13.
Yeah. And so I applied to a few schools, high schools, and got into one in Toronto. And so I did I went there and did my 13th over there. So I did 1 year of high school and 4 years of college in Toronto. And then after that, I spent 1 year living there. And then I moved back to Hong Kong. I was 16 years old, living alone in a house, in an apartment. And I left there in 91 when I was 21. And then I went back to Hong Kong. I studied, at that time, what I studied was data science, which in 91, there was no data, but I did study it, but there was no data anywhere. So even though I graduated pretty well with good grades, when I came back to Hong Kong, there was no data, there was no job that required any sort of analytical skills. But I did work in an insurance company actually, and I wanted to study to be an actuary. I did that for 2 years, and one day my dad just said, okay, enough of, I'm a Sindhi boy. So in the Sindhi community, you normally end up working in the family business.
Yes.
So my dad kind of dragged me into his office and said, we are in the clothing business, so you come and join us. So he said, come and join us in the clothing business, and who works for a salary?
Right.
Do your own business.
Yes.
So I said, okay. But it was a big mistake because me and my dad weren't. So it was that period in the early 90s where technology was starting to
Ramp up, right?
yeah. So I mean, scanners and
Yes. Yeah.
we went from telexes and fax machines now to doing internet, things across the internet and emails and all of that.
You didn't think of using data science. I mean,
I couldn't. There was no data anywhere.
Okay, even back then.
Even back then, there was no data. The only sort of domain that had any data was insurance companies, and that's why I actually joined them. Because at that time, what an actuary does is risk management, it's calculating risk.
Okay.
So you need data to calculate that risk. But there wasn't a lot of domains that had data in those days, or even collected data, unlike how we collect data today. So I did move into the clothing business with my dad. And my first posting outside, after the first year working for my dad, was in Spain. So he sent me to Sevilla, which is a beautiful city. There was a lot of clothing happening in Spain at that time. So I went and lived in Spain for a year. My wife, I got married and I came back from Spain. And my wife had a Slovak girlfriend that at her office. There was a Slovak girl who was married to a Czech guy. And one day, while living in Hong Kong, she's the wife, the Slovak girl said to my wife that we'd like to eat Indian food. Would you take us to an Indian food restaurant in Hong Kong? And so we took her to a restaurant called Woodlands, which was dosa and idli,
right.
South Indian,
because
they were vegetarian. When the four of us were sitting and talking, her husband Roman was in fact in Hong Kong he was working for Czech Telecom in the phone instruments. He was working in a division because in anybody who wanted a telephone at home needed a telephone.
Yes.
So you get a phone with your connection. So he was working in the department that bought these phones from China to sell to the Czech Republic. And so he said to me, he said, this was about 96. He said, we've just come out of communism. There's a lot of opportunities. Why don't you go and have a look? Prague may be a good market for clothing. So I said, okay. So I went to Prague on a holiday myself. Not a holiday, it was more a business holiday. I just wanted to see.
Yes.
And I went there and I fell in love with the city. What happened after that was I called up my dad. I said, I'm here. I really like it here. I'm going to come back. I think I'm packing up and moving here because I liked it so much. Fortunately, growing up and being born in Hong Kong, back then it was British. It was a British territory.
Yeah.
So we had British passports, which allowed us to basically live in Europe without too much trouble. And so, 96 November, I went back to Hong Kong after a month living there. And February 97, me and my wife moved to Prague. And in Prague, I started a business, a clothing business. We were manufacturing in China and then selling to a lot of department stores in Prague, which, the Tesco's and the Hypernovas, Kaufland. There were a lot of department stores that had opened up in the Czech Republic at the time because it was untouched. There was nothing.
That was
97. And one of the reasons it happened in 97 also was 97 is when the Chinese took over Hong Kong. So there was a bit of a fear among people in Hong Kong that it's going to be China and it's going to be Chinese and everything's going to change. And this beautiful city that was, very democratic, it was open, it was a lot of fun, would now be Chinese.
Right.
And so because of the fear factor, a lot of us just went away.
Again, yeah.
So a lot of Chinese moved to Canada, to Australia, to England, and I moved to Prague, thinking, maybe my future is there. So yeah, and then fast forward, we were there till 2008 was when we decided to move to Pune, because at that time, my father and mom, who were living in Hong Kong at that time, in early 2000, they had moved to Bangalore, actually. My grandmom used to live there, so they moved to Bangalore. They retired. They moved to Bangalore, but they didn't really like it so much. They preferred Pune. They moved to Pune. That was in the early 2000s, but they were getting older, and they needed somebody to take care of them now because they were, they called me and said, you're done. We need you back home now. Wrap up and move here. I made that decision to move in 2007, but it took me a year to sell the business and wind up and moved here. I moved here on 4th of July, 2008.
What a freedom, the Freedom Day of America.
Yeah. What happened after that was when we came here, there was a global recession in 2008. So didn't really know what to do. I thought clothing, and then there was a recession, can't do that. I was thinking about a lot of things and then, couldn't think about what to do. But I used to eat at the Ishta Hotel a lot. There was a Chinese restaurant called Bantao.
Yeah. Yes, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to go there a lot, and because I was eating there a lot, I used to sometimes call the chef and just chat with him because he saw me so often over there, and he was also a Chinese guy.
So you could interact in Cantonese.
Yeah. No, he was a Chinese guy who was also again one of those Chinese guys that lived in India all his life. Sort of, we have a few of those that in different parts of India, including Calcutta. Right. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of Chinese that live in these places and they speak fluent Cantonese. They look Chinese, but they speak fluent Hindi and all that. So his name was Chef Anthony, and I was sitting with Chef one day and saying, I'm so confused. I don't know what to do here. Just rewind a little bit. Now, when I came here, so all my kids were born in Prague. Okay.
All of them. Okay.
All of them. And they never ate a lot of Indian food except for the 4 or 5 things that me and my wife, or my wife actually, knew how to cook.
Okay.
So we'd cook a few of those things, and that's their Indian food sort of connection.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they ate the local food, a lot of European food, American food, everything that Prague had to offer, but very little Indian food. And so when I moved here in 2008, um, it was quite difficult for me to get food that they liked. So the only other option was we had to go to this certain store in Pune to buy all the imported food that was available.
There was one store,
Yeah.
Asante, I don't know if you know it.
Yeah, there was this a couple of stores, it was just but a very few
Yeah.
that had all the hams and the cheese and the cereals and the chocolates that that was available for my kids to eat. But I would go every weekend and spend crazy amount of money buying all this food for my children because they just couldn't eat anything local. And so when I was sitting with this chef a few months later, I said, I don't know what to do. He said, look, Api, we have a big problem with these restaurants that we have, is we just can't get ingredients. Right? We have these restaurants. We want to mix so much.
Yes.
We want to make these different cuisines and these different flavors. We do the trials, but then later to get it was just the consistency of getting these ingredients was very difficult. So I said, okay, how can I help? He said, look, just get me all this stuff and I will buy from you. So I said, okay, that kind of makes sense. I sat with my wife and I said, should we go down this road? Because at that time in Pune, there wasn't too many places to buy all of this to begin. And there was one big store in the center of Pune, there was nothing else.
Right.
So it's, everywhere we live in Europe or in Hong Kong or whether it was Canada, you had your local neighborhood supermarket where you could buy a lot of things, but not here.
Yeah.
So I said, this can't happen. I mean, how is it that the whole city depends on one store for all of these things? Which is why I decided to open Tutto Bene. The first Tutto Bene opened in the south of Pune, in an area called Vanodi, in November 2008.
8 years, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We opened the first store in November 2008 in a mall. And the mall was dead. There was nobody in the mall except me. And across me, there was a Vodafone store. Okay, now back then in those days, you couldn't pay your mobile bill on the phone.
Right.
You had these old Nokia phones. So you had to actually go to the physical store to pay your bill. But the good thing about me being right across the Vodafone store at that time was the customers of Vodafone there were 2 days in a month where bills were generated.
Right.
And all of a sudden on those 2 days or 2 days after that, you get a lot of people into the mall just paying their bills.
Okay.
And I was right across them. Like they were on one side and
I
I was...
remember that because I've been to your store back in the mall as well.
Correct. So on those 3 or 4 days of the month, we'd see a lot of people come into the mall and then they would look at us and they'd come into the store and say, wow, where did this guy come from? Because actually, you know what? I think Tutto Bene was something that I had dreamed about, but I didn't know it was something I wanted to do. It was consciously, it was something I was dreaming about, that one day I'm going to do this, but I didn't know that I wanted to do that. So when we decided to open the store, the way we put the store together was a bit of a puzzle that I had already somehow in my head, had it planned from living in Hong Kong and then Canada, Spain.
That's your
Prague.
influence, right?
So that my life, the journeys that I've had in my life, allowed me to see how meat was cut and served in Spain, how meat was cut and served in Prague, and in Hong Kong, and in Canada, and how the products were placed, how the lighting was, the hygiene, the cleanliness, the flow. So actually, when we first opened our first store, I'm going to be a little modest right now. I think it was a beautifully made store. It was quite beautiful.
For me, it was as well quite new to see a store like that.
Yeah, and in Pune, it's not Bombay, it's not Delhi, it's not Bangalore, it's Pune.
There's one store which had imported stuff, but it was stuffed.
Yeah.
It was stuffed like a typical supermarket that we have in India, who are just stuffing things on top of each other, and it's very difficult to find things. Back then, I think they didn't even have the labels of cereals or staples or your flowers.
Yeah.
like that. You see
Yeah.
it more in Europe, but in India we didn't have. We had just one store, but yeah, it was really
Correct.
chaotic.
Yeah.
So then that was your store. You
Yeah.
really had this cold cuts
Yeah.
lined up,
Yeah.
and when you came into picture, and I think I didn't come. I wasn't there a lot because for me, I was rather newly married to my husband back then.
Yeah.
And seeing his life as to what he eats, right? Because I'm as well an Indian, born and brought up in India, so we're not into cold cuts.
Yeah.
And when I moved then to closer to the store where your store was,
Yeah.
and that was my first time to see the store, and I was surprised. Oh, it's one of we're progressing.
Yeah.
So feeling like
Yeah.
we're progressing.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that you covered that point because that was my next question. What is the influence?
Yeah.
And how that has changed in the approach of your business.
When we opened a store, like I said, it was, but it also helped that I lived abroad. I mean, I've lived in so many countries, and you kind of saw day in, day out how meat was kept, how meat was cut, how it was packed, how it was stored. Everything was, thought of it myself. It actually helped living outside.
It's a way of living, isn't it, outside?
Right. So, we would see it so much. And one of the great things about living in Prague in those days, because it was central in Europe, we used to on a Friday just get in the car and drive in any direction, and you're in another country in 2 hours. Let it be Germany, let it be Italy, let it be Slovakia, Poland, Austria. So the proximity to other major cities in Europe was also another way for us to see how people did things in other countries. And you just go get away for the weekend, go see what they did, enjoy their food, eat, and come back.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I think Tutto Bene was something that it was in the back of my mind. Perhaps I would have never done it if I didn't move to India. If I continued living in Prague, I might have never done it.
Yeah.
But when I came to India and I really didn't know what to do, and I saw there was a bit of a void in the market for good quality meat, good quality ham, good quality cheese, and just the way stores were run, the lighting, the air conditioning, and more importantly, the handling of a lot of the food.
Yes.
That it was supposed to be handled the way food is supposed to be handled. Within 3 months of the store opening, there was a lot of
demand for it.
Not demand. All of a sudden, there was this. Who's this guy? Who are these 2 people from? They're Indians, but where are they from? Who are they? That they've come and done something like this, and they've done it in Pune. And so we had people from Cosmo and GQ and a lot of the food magazines, the Times. They just came to the store, and the local correspondents for these magazines were hearing about this one store. And actually, we were a little store. It was all of perhaps 600, 800 square feet. It was a little store. So my thought process in those days, there was 3 reasons why I opened it. The first reason was, now there's a store closer to me that I can get the stuff. The second thing was, I love eating, and I like eating good food. So I'm surrounded by this good food at all times. So it made me happy. Like, I was really happy just being in there, seeing good food, eating good food. And then my children also love the store. So they'd come and hang with me a lot in the store. And
that was a nice move. It worked well for you.
Correct. But the original model was a little different. It was a store. While we call it Tutto Bene Delicatessen, it was actually just a deli. Now, in a lot of delis across the world, there's also a section for live food.
Yes.
Right? Fresh made food in front of you.
Yeah.
Now, what happened was, and the reason we started our sandwiches and the salad business was also because we had a lot of people come to us and, why is this cheese so expensive? Can I try it? Why is this ham so expensive? Because it was expensive. Parmesan cheese or Parma ham or a lot of, cheeses that were imported. And we had a really high duty rate on all of these in those days. It was very expensive, but a lot of the locals, they wanted to try what is all this stuff and why is it so expensive? So they wanted to taste it. So, we thought it is the only way to sell it.
Make sandwiches,
I can't force you to buy something without tasting it if you don't know it.
Yeah.
So we would just shave off a little cheese and cut a little bit of ham and let people taste it. And at the end of every month, we'd see, wow, we've lost a kilo in tasting. Now, how do we tackle this? So how do we tackle this problem of giving away a lot of just free sampling. It's not a vada pav that was made in Pune versus a vada pav in Mumbai. You kind of understood the flavor profile will be the same, but for a lot of people, they didn't have that sort of idea. So you end up giving away a lot of stuff, right? So I said, okay, how about we do this? Let's start making sandwiches. Let's start putting in a type of cheese, a type of ham with some salad, some cucumbers, some tomatoes, put it together and sell it. Now what happens is we're not losing money giving it away for free. So if somebody says, can I try this ham or try this cheese or try both? I'll be like, okay, why don't you try the sandwich? It's got both.
Yeah.
And we made it a point that everything that was in that sandwich was available to buy in the store. If you wanted just one sandwich, it's easier just come to us, buy it and take it and eat it. But if you wanted to take it home and enjoy it with 4 people, 8 people, then you could buy all the ingredients from our store. We'll slice the meat, cut the cheese, all of that. You just have to go home and assemble it, right? So that's when I think a lot of our products started moving, and it was really fresh. So especially with the ham, when you store ham, when you cut it once every few days, it tends to get a little bit off. Okay. But when you're cutting it 5 times a day, it doesn't go off at all. Okay. And before you know it, all of it is gone in your sandwiches, and you open a fresh pack almost the next day for another customer.
Right.
So the freshness also stayed.
So it was rolling. The business was rolling.
Yeah. So and also the freshness of the product, right. Which is why back in the day, even now, there's such high turnover of our products that the freshness is always maintained, right? And because I've eaten it all my life, I know what it should taste like. But then there was another problem. The staff we hired, I mean, a lot of our customers didn't know what we were selling. The staff would have no clue what we were selling. They had no idea what any of the stuff was. So they wouldn't even have a palate to understand what it should taste like.
And also to kind of say the customer, like, this is better, not...
Yeah.
Because I know many times when you're in the store, the staff will say, you should try this meat or this cheese. This has that flavor, which, of course, if you don't taste, then you cannot be able to describe it.
Right. So if you go to like a European store in Spain or in Italy, there's a high chance, most likely, that the person who's cutting the meat has been eating his whole life.
Yes. Yeah.
So he knows what he's selling. But that wasn't the case in India. I mean, in Pune, for example, for that matter, it was very difficult for me to not be in the store to be able to tell my customer what I'm selling. Yeah. Because the staff didn't understand that. It took us a long time to educate our staff what we were selling. It took a long time because they would eat chicken or mutton at home. Right. And that's about it. Now, all of a sudden, we're introducing pork. Right. And all these kind of different kind of cheese. Yeah. And, salamis. Yeah. They've never seen this their whole life. So they didn't understand it. So it took us a while to train them and offer them, guys, eat, if you feel like trying it, go ahead and please try it. Because only then will you be able to also explain. I mean, we had customers who were non-speaking Indians, non-English speaking Indians. So they, spoken Marathi or just Hindi. And I don't speak Marathi at all. My Hindi was terrible when I came here. So I would depend on my staff to translate to the customer what I was training him.
That was a nice challenge that you had.
It was a challenge. It was a huge challenge. It was a huge challenge at that time because the products were so different. When we started selling olive oil in 2008, a lot of people used to come to me and say, I buy oil for 40 rupees a liter and you're selling something for 400 rupees a liter. Right. Because back in the day, olive oil was much more expensive than it is today. Today you can buy 5 liters for 3, 4, 5, depending on the brand, 3, 4, 5,000 rupees. But those days, it was like 1,000 rupees a liter or 1,200, sometimes 1,400 rupees a liter. So it was difficult for me to explain to the client why it was so expensive, right? And then with olive oil, there was 3 or 4 different types of olive oil. What do you use? Which olive oil do you use for what? Yeah. Right? You don't cook with an extra virgin, or you don't fry with an extra virgin because it's too expensive. You fry with a pomace or a lighter one, But that whole journey was very difficult. So many times I used to go to Bombay and spend the weekend and visit a lot of the competing stores over there to understand what they were doing and how they were trading their stuff, it was equally difficult. It was, in my case, at least the owner is sitting in the store. In their case, it's staff and managers who are sitting in the store.
They had no idea how
So
to.
I'm sitting in the store and my staff is selling it. So I would pay attention and see what my staff is saying. And if I feel that they're getting stuck or the customer is still unsure, I would step in. But when you go to a store where it's run by staff and managers, and back in those days, where there wasn't a lot of knowledge in that kind of
The gourmet food,
the
right?
food division, so I realized that, you know what, I'm probably doing a better job by being there in the store. It took me about 2 years of constantly training before I decided to open my second store. And it took me another 2 years to train those staff before I was even open my third store.
For me, that was the next question as to how did you move, or what were the challenges of moving your physical store? Just explain. You really put a lot of efforts in bringing in the hygiene, the way it should look like the aesthetics, exactly how it is in the West. From there, during the pandemic time, and we have to really shift the business 100% online, right? That was not an easy choice, I'm sure.
It wasn't easy, but it wasn't difficult either, because fortunately, during COVID, pre-COVID, India was, at least that's what I think, India was very resistant towards online shopping.
Yes, yeah.
Indians prefer to see what they're buying. You know, they like to check the product, the labels, the expiry dates, etc. before they bought.
Yeah, right.
I don't think they were confident that something that was delivered at home was allowed to be returned.
Yes.
They assumed that whatever was delivered home, you had to keep it.
Right.
But there was a part you could return if you wanted to return. Whether the seller chose to take it back or not is another question.
Yeah.
But I think the resistance towards online shopping was quite high. But that changed completely during COVID, because it was almost the time when we were trying to get out of retail into online. And that, I mean, COVID was not good for anybody. But for that business of the online business, it did help us to get customers to start shopping online.
I think many businesses were booming
Exactly.
because of the online option available. Yeah.
So we did. So to answer your question, that when we moved online, it was not as difficult. Had it not been for COVID, it might have been a little bit more difficult to get the word of mouth out in the open, to get people to embrace online shopping and to allow us the opportunity to deliver to them at home. Right? So but COVID did help us do that.
Right.
Because if you remember, during COVID, you could only shop really from 8 in the morning till 10 in the morning.
Yes, also that there was restriction.
There was this
delivery restrictions.
No, there wasn't really a delivery restriction. The restriction was more the physically going into a store and shopping. And if you go in a supermarket, there was a certain calculation that if it's a X square feet, only so many people can go into the store at the same time.
Yes,
right?
Places.
Now, what happened with that was, I live right next to a supermarket, and from my window I can see the supermarket. And every morning at 7, if I woke up at 7, because now in the middle of COVID, I started sleeping at 4 in the morning and waking up at 11 in the morning, because everything just turned around. And the reason was that my kids were gaming all the time because they had no school, right? So I was watching my kids game, and they'd get hungry at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and then they'd wake me up and they want to eat something. So I'd wake up, feed them food, and then at 7 in the morning, but I knew I had to wake up at 7 because I needed to go to the supermarket. But to get stuff during this transition, because I'd shut my stores by then, and my online was just opening. Right. So I also didn't have produce for myself at that time. So I actually had to go to the supermarket to get produce, like milk and all that.
The staples, yes.
And I'd look out my window and I'd see And I calculate in my head that if they say they're allowing 50 people into the store every 20 minutes, and there was more than 300 people lined up, there's no chance for me to go in the store. I'm not going to make it. And unfortunately, at 7 in the morning, there were 300 people waiting in line to go into the store. So
Crazy
you'd
guys.
end up not being able to get anything. But then the government had allowed essential services
Right.
and home delivery. So including us. So what we did was we quickly ramped up our online business and started carrying stuff that now we can deliver 24 hours.
Okay.
Right. While the stores were only allowed to open 2 hours,
Yes.
we were allowed to deliver 24 hours because of essential services. So that helped us a lot. Because COVID hit us during transition. We were not ready to go online just yet.
So you were in the transition of already moving online?
Already moving online.
Oh, okay.
And COVID hit us right then.
So that accelerated the whole process.
That made us accelerate the whole process of getting online. And by early June, we were completely ready to go online.
Awesome.
And we were ready to deliver anything to anybody. There was no turning back. The online business did not turn back after that. For Pune. And we are Pune centric. But there was no option to deliver to any other city in the country because, it was difficult logistically to deliver. We started getting calls from a lot of places, but we just couldn't deliver outside of Pune. And Pune also, there was a limited area that we could deliver. I mean, most of Pune we could. So, yeah, it was interesting times.
Those were the crazy times, in fact. But what now you explain that when I'm picturing a queue of 300 people in a supermarket for basic things, everyday stuff, right? Back then I was in Belgium, and there as well, there was you had to be in the queue, but you had trolley in between.
Correct.
That was the discipline.
Social discipline. Yeah.
Social distancing part. But yeah, not the number as you mentioned of 300.
Yeah.
But yes, it was across the globe, I think,
Yeah.
quite different many
It was a
people.
very difficult period, but yeah.
But in that, guess what? You were lucky. One of the few lucky people.
Yeah, so I don't.
Grateful, right? You have. I mean, I can't.
I'm grateful. I prefer not to talk about that
Yeah.
much because a lot of people suffered at that time in the food business. So it's not something that I like to talk about because I have a lot of friends who are in the restaurant business that suffered a lot, and it was difficult for them.